Hi, and welcome back to Gardog the Gamorrean Star Wars Miniatures tutorials. In my first video, we looked at the maps and the various things depicted on them, including doors. We discussed how a door can open or close at the end of a character's turn depending on whether any characters are adjacent to it or not. In this video, we want to go into a bit more detail, and also discuss a couple of special abilities that can also affect the opening and closing of doors. Firstly, let's look at the squares that we consider to be adjacent to a door. In this first example, we have a 1 square wide door. The square immediately in front of it on both sides, plus 1 square to either side of them, are all considered adjacent to the door, when determining if it should be open or closed. Now we have a 3 square wide door. And if we apply the same logic to it, we have a total of 10 squares that are considered adjacent. The only time that this logic changes is if the door starts or ends at a corner. With this example, the squares immediately in front of the door on both sides are considered adjacent, but when we go to add the 1 square to either side, it's not a problem on the top side, but on the lower side, there are walls blocking it, so with this door, only a total of 8 squares count as adjacent to it, when determining if it should be open or closed. And the other part to remember is that a door only opens or closes at the end of a character's turn. This means that this rebel trooper couldn't move adjacent to a door, have it to open, and attack through it, all in the same turn. And in case you were hoping to make use of the mobile attack special ability of a character like Lando Calrissian, to move adjacent to a door, have it open, and then continue moving through it, that doesn't work either, as the door wouldn't open until the end of Lando's turn. But keep in mind that we are referring to a turn here, not a phase, and not a round. If you need a refresher on the difference between turns, phases, and rounds, please refer to my 5th video. Let's look at another example. This door here is closed. My opponent won initiative this round, and elected to activate first. They activated a character in another part of the map, and as I use the tournament rules, their phase has ended after only 1 activation. I can now activate 2 characters in my phase. Firstly, I activate my rebel trooper, who doesn't attack, and moves to this square, which is adjacent to the door. The rebel trooper's turn ends, and the door opens. For the second activation of this phase, I activate this rebel pilot, who could either move through the door or into a position to make an attack through the open door against this stormtrooper. And be aware that it isn't only the activating character that could affect the opening or closing of a door. Some characters have special abilities or force powers that allow them to move other characters, like the ASP-7's lift, or Anakin Solo's force push 2. Additionally, a character being defeated and removed from the map could result in a door closing. Effectively, at the end of every character's turn, you need to check if the status of any doors have changed. Now, let's look at a couple of special abilities that could also affect a door opening or closing. The most common one of these is Override. In the description, the first half of it says that at the end of their turn, a character can designate 1 door that they can see, in other words, has line of sight to, as open or closed. Let's use our favorite little astromech droid for an example. R2-D2 could end his movement here, and at the end of his turn, could open this door even though he isn't adjacent to it, and neither is any other character. Think of it as if R2 has plugged into a computer socket, and made the door open. On the other hand, if this stormtrooper was already adjacent to the door, which would mean the door would be open, R2 could use his override ability to close that door, provided he had line of sight to it, at the end of his turn. Override, as its name suggests, will override, or overrule, the normal function of opening or closing a door. Effectively, consider that the door is locked open, or locked closed. And as the description says, it will remain that way until the end of that character's next turn, not the end of the round, even if other characters' movements would normally have affected the status of the door. The order in which doors open and close is totally up to the player controlling the character with the override ability. This is a very important point, and a little difficult to explain in words alone, so let's look at another example. Here, we have R2-D2 again, who ended his previous turn adjacent to this door. This would mean that the door would currently be open. It's now the next round. R2 activates, and moves away from the door. The door remains open while it's still R2's turn. R2 decides to finish moving, and his turn comes to an end. But before he allows this door to close, he uses his override ability to open this other door which he currently has line of sight to. The door he was originally adjacent to now closes, as nobody is now adjacent to it, and play moves on to the next character, with this door open, even though there is no character adjacent to it, and R2 no longer has line of sight to it either. One thing to be aware of regarding the override special ability is that if a large or huge character is occupying squares on both sides of a door, the door cannot be forced to close. In this example, we have Jabba the Hutt occupying squares on both sides of this door. If R2-D2 was to use his override ability on this door to try and close it, nothing would happen. But, if Jabba was to then move away, prior to R2's next turn, the door would close, even though this Gamorrean guard is still adjacent to it. The next ability that could affect doors opening and closing is Door Gimmick. You will see that it is almost identical to the override description, with one very important difference. With override, you can designate a door to be open or closed, but with Door Gimmick, you can only designate it as open, you can't force an open door to close. And in case you were wondering what would happen if Door Gimmick and override were used on the same door, let's have a look at another example. Here we have an Itochi tech specialist, and she has just used her Door Gimmick ability to open this door. Later in that same round, R2-D2 uses his override ability to close the door. The override special ability will always overrule Door Gimmick, no matter which one was used first. But then also keep in mind that if R2 was to activate earlier in the next round than the Itochi, and R2 didn't use override again on the same door, the Itochi's Door Gimmick would then become the active ability, forcing the door to open again. And if we had a similar situation, but this time, we have Lobot replacing the Itochi, and he uses his override ability to open the door. Then R2 uses his override to close it, the most recent of those override abilities, so R2's, would determine the current status of the door, which would be closed, until the end of R2's next turn. The next ability to look at is Satchel Charge. A simple way to think of Satchel Charge is that the character has placed an explosive charge on the door and blows it up. This means that it can't be closed by any means, for the remainder of the skirmish, including override. The critical things with this ability are that the character must be adjacent to the door to use it, and, unlike override and Door Gimmick, using Satchel Charge replaces attacks for that character. And as it replaces attacks, the door would open immediately, not at the end of the character's turn. The last ability that I want to mention is Shatter Beam. This is the equivalent of Satchel Charge, except that the character doesn't need to be adjacent to the door to use it. They just need to have line of sight to it. Effectively, the character fires a beam of energy at a door, to shatter, or destroy it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me for my next video, where I'll show you some of the methods that I use to keep track of various things during a skirmish.